Alright, welcome back to the Green Dispensary Marketing Podcast. My name is Samuel Fisher, founder of GDM, always trying to be talking with the top entrepreneurs in the cannabis space. And today I'm really excited, obviously, to be talking with one of the leaders of LinkedIn, shall we say. This is Seth Yakatan. He's been instrumental in raising over $1 billion and successfully exiting 22 different companies. That's something a lot of people can't say that they've done. He's actually the co-founder of Yakatan Associates International. He co-founded with his father, God bless his soul. He specializes in advisory and financing within the cannabis sector. And outside of work, Seth is an active yoga practitioner and classic car connoisseur. How are you doing today, Seth?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Sam?
Doing great to have you. Excited to talk with you. Excited to learn some things from you and pick a little bit of your brain on the cannabis industry. I understand you got a lot of knowledge, and so really excited to just get a little chunk of it. And so just to start off, I'd really like to start from square one. And so what is Yakatan Associates? How did it come to be? And what are your goals with it?
It's a global advisory firm. And we really help usually C-suites or investors to figure out how to monetize companies. And that could take a variety of different forms. You could raise money for it, or you could sell it, or you could license things. So, really it's kind of taking a holistic look at an organization or an idea and trying to figure out how to get money for it effectively. I started with my dad in 2001. It was focused exclusively on therapeutic life sciences, FDA-regulated drugs, diagnostics, devices, and research products. And those industries are really hard because usually you have to invest a lot of money to get to revenue without a lot of probability of success. So in 2008, 9, 10, I started looking at things that I thought were going to be easier. So medical foods and sports nutrition and wellness and broader consumer products. It led me to the therapeutic applications of cannabis, which led me to rec cannabis serendipitously. And, in terms of my goals, I just want to get up every day and breathe oxygen. That's my biggest goal. So.
Sweet. And so let's talk a little bit about your background. You have experience in biotech and all these different companies. And so were these the ones that we were talking about, raising over $1 billion, exiting 22 different companies, or some of these in the cannabis space, or what's the deal behind that claim to fame, shall we say?
Well, I have sold or advised on the sale of 22 different companies. I can honestly tell you that most of them were in the research products space. So people who sold devices or instrumentation or consumable products to other people. Not really sure that I've helped someone to successfully exit a cannabis company yet. Raised a lot of money in cannabis, so certainly been helpful there. But, it's kind of a lot of it is manifesting in the amount of, I was a professional investor for 11 years. So, the amount of capital that we actually deployed into companies far exceeded $1 billion. And, the amount of money that I've actually realized for transactions is in those numbers. So that's how I kind of arrived at them. But I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, a little bit, but more or less. So let's dive into cannabis here. And so, what are some companies that that maybe you're working with right now that you're excited about exiting with, that you think that are going to have some success with, if you can share?
Yeah, it's pretty widely known that I've been involved in Glass House for about 2.5 years as the kind of principal corporate finance advisor there, working with the C-suite to help them to raise capital and look at M&A and expansion opportunities for them. That company is already public. It went public before I was involved. So, what I've been helpful, I think, to do there is to optimize cost of capital and look at ways to scale and grow. I was inside of Ease for about 2.5 years doing the same thing. And depending upon your view, Ease was either, the greatest thing that never happened or an overnight failure. So, I think that's an example of a lot of things in cannabis that a lot of money have been thrown at and still, haven't largely been successful. I think for me going forward, I've identified, and I've talked about it a couple of times, somewhere between 150 and 250 companies in the world that are usually private, that are somewhere between 25 and 150 million in revenue and are profitable in cannabis. And I firmly believe that if cannabis reform ever happens federally in the United States, that those 150 to 200 companies are the most important, and that's where the action is. And I've espoused, publicly on podcasts and in LinkedIn, some of those companies and what I think about them. But I think it's, traditionally the lower middle market privates where the exits are going to be driven in the future.
Yeah, that's interesting. I saw you post, what was it, 2 weeks ago? You were talking about how like the debt is cycling up a lot in cannabis recently, and that a lot of the money floating around right now in the cannabis industry is debt. And so, being with somebody that's worked with some of these bigger companies, what are some tricks that you've seen working at the higher levels that these small mom and pop stores could utilize and leverage to perhaps work themselves up to be one of these big companies?
I don't know that there's one thing that I can point to. I think every business is kind of different. One thing that I certainly think I've incorporated as a general principle is that if something is just not profitable, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense long term. So, one of the operational decisions that I see a lot is we're going to raise a bunch of money and we're going to generate revenue, or we're going to raise a bunch of money and we're going to develop a product, and we'll figure out how we're going to make money afterwards. So fundamentally, if something doesn't make money prima facie, that's usually, I want to say a red flag, but usually you're up-regulating your degree of difficulty downstream. So that's maybe one thing that I would say to smaller people, that if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense.
Hey,
And
DJ Quick.
In the immortal words of DJ Quick, I am dating myself. But I think, for me, a lot of my methodology is very street and very simple because it works, So I think just that one thing, I think, is very consistent in most of the businesses that I've been successful with.
Yeah. And so I've also noticed that you've been talking a lot about, the THC drinks market right now. Is that something that you think that these players, whether they be small or big, should be leveraging right now to kind of increase their profits?
Possibly. I think it's broader than that. So, with my alleged vast experience and being a private equity investor, I've seen consolidation occur in 16 or 17 different industries in the last 30 years. When I was inside of Union Bank, we were working for a fund that invested in 17 different media telecom sectors, right? So, I just saw a lot of massive consolidation. And when I look at cannabis to me is just another CPG.
What's a CPG for dumb people like me?
Consumer packaged good.
Gotcha.
That competes for your share of wallet versus other consumer packaged goods like supplements and pharmaceuticals and tobacco and beverages and alcohol and cosmetics and candy and food and luxury goods. Okay. So to your point, I really believe that, and I really believe that if federal reform or federal descheduling occurs, what's going to happen is that most of these lower middle market private companies are either going to go public or going to get bought by these 7 or 8 different vertical markets. If we go to beverage specifically, beverage has grown to, depending upon what your number is, somewhere between a $2 to $3 billion industry in close to 3 years. Took cannabis to be 10 years to be a $30 billion industry. So the growth trajectory of beverages is insane. Alcohol is losing market share. Younger people are drinking less. Beer is being consumed less. When you look at how Delta beverages, right? So let's talk about Delta beverages, have penetrated and fit into the supply chain and fit into the 3-tiered system and have been rolled out at point of sale outside of the dispensary format. I firmly believe that beverage is one of the places where you're going to first see consolidation for several reasons. So the reason people are bullish on beverage is it's one of the better stories around cannabis. The velocity of those companies is excessive, and there's not a clear leader yet. And it feels like that space is the race to the first company to be $100 million in revenue. And if you get a modicum of reform, I think in 18 to 24 months, you're going to see 3 or 4 vitamin water style exits in that sector. And then it's going to close and everyone's going to move on to the next thing. But the reason I'm so hot and people are so hot on beverages, it's one of the few places in cannabis where you can see all of those things occurring, given what I allegedly know.
What other big products, big movements, big sectors of the cannabis industry do you anticipate having a lot of growth? Maybe we'll have a Coors Light of the THC drink sector. What else do you think, or maybe an influx of flower, blunts, or what do you vision in your crystal ball?
I think gummies are going to end up having a moment. Only, and this is the first time I've ever said this, so you are getting an exclusive, Sam.
Oh yeah, thank you. Shout out Seth Yakatan.
Exclusive. There seems to be more capital. If I look at all of those verticals we talked about, there seems to be more capital allocated into the confectionery industry than almost any of those other industries. And no confectionery company, and I might be wrong, has made a significant movement into cannabis. So when I look at Mars or Nestle or insert another big food company there, if cannabis is a $30 billion industry and gummies 10% share, so it's a $3 billion market, somebody's going to get in there. And I'm knocking on the door of every single one. Every top 100 global food company has got a DM from me daily. What's going on over here? What's happening? I think gummies could have a day. So that's one area that I think could be interesting. Other than that, I think it's probably hard to say. International seems to be getting a lot of play these days. I think it will depend upon, pre-rolls and the work that Jeter has done in that space has come on in 2 or 3 years. I think I've talked about how surprised I was by the growth of that form factor on LinkedIn. I do think that I talk about a company, although it's smaller a lot, called Levels Pro Tabs, where I do think a effect-based consumer product that fits into something like a CVS shelf. I think products like that will eventually long-term do well. Yeah. So those are a couple. I think flour is going to be more like I think like a wine product where you're going to have, series of high-end things that you're going to want. I think vape is a very competitive sector and it's harder, but that's kind of, don't know if that answers everything, but some of my thoughts.
No, good. And so you're talking about the candy, Mars. Do you think? What do you think? Are they waiting on federal legalization, or what's stopping them from jumping in the ring right now?
That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. Remember, whether we want to admit it or not, this is still a marginalized and constrained industry, right? If you look at, and I've talked about it a lot, if you look at the amount of capital globally that's available to other industries, and I think I ran a graphic, which I should probably rerun. I think there's like 1,100 life science or biotech investors in the world. And that sector right now is nuclear winter, right? Like it's really hard to raise money. 1,100, let's say. And that's public, private, global private equity. I can invest in the public equity markets in the US, right? I think if you look at that group of investors in cannabis as a sample size or a population size, I think that N is like 70, might be lower. So automatically you're taking, the amount of available capital that's out there and you're cutting it by 99%. And it just makes it really, really, really hard. So, the unlock is when all of that capital can come into the market.
Yeah. And so do you envision a scenario where maybe we have like a black swan where, somebody who's like, maybe like myself, who doesn't have a whole lot of capital, all of a sudden develops this big old product that turns into the, a Mars level candy in the cannabis industry? What would you say?
No, I see it a little bit different than that, and I want to go back to the first question that you asked. So what's inhibiting these folks from coming in? What's inhibiting them from coming in is federal illegality, right? So most large corporations or large private equity funds or large pension funds have some type of representation or warranty in their operating agreements or their charter that says we're not going to get involved in things that are illegal federally. So you have this sin clause. And cannabis still trips that up. So you can't list a cannabis company on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. So the moment that you have federal change and that occurs and you have clarity, whether or not that money will come in remains to be seen, but the handcuffs that are on that money now goes away. So why hasn't a candy company invested into cannabis? Well, number one, because they probably can't unless they really want to figure out a way to do it. And two, if you look at the last 12 to 10 years of investment capital, nothing's really worked. So if I'm Mars and I have, confectionery lines in 5 continents, and the amount of scale that I could blow through is logarithmically greater than $3 billion of gummies, I'm just going to wait till the gate falls down, and I'm just going to have gummies on the market tomorrow, right? Because I already own the shelf space.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. 100%. Yeah. Well, let's move forward a little bit. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about the partnerships and the projects you're working on. And so you mentioned Glass House. You were talking about Ease. Are there any other partnerships that you're currently working on right now that you're really excited about, or projects?
I launched a new consulting firm, which is called Ordo Verde, that we're just about to kind of decloak, and that is kind of operational, kind of quantitative and capital markets level advisory for cannabis companies on cultivation, manufacturing, product, and retail. So we do have a fairly large MSO client that we've been doing that with and for, and that's been pretty interesting. So been working on that pretty hard. Very focused on a couple of initiatives for Glass House otherwise, but between that and the LinkedIn and the speaking and those two, it's definitely keeping me busy. So
that's awesome. Busy's always good. And so let's imagine somebody's working with you. What does the service look like when we're working with Yakatan Associates? What is it like?
You call, I pick up.
Anytime, 24/7.
You call, I pick up.
Okay, and so what kind of questions are on the board and off the board? Is it we're talking about like spiritual coaching, life advice? What kind of questions do you generally get? What kind of services do you generally provide for your clients?
Honestly, Sam, it depends, right? So, most people seem to think that I have some kind of magic beans. Okay, I'm going to dispel any myth. And you can, talk about this with your shamanic teachers. I don't got no magic beans, brother. Okay, I got one thing. I got repeated blunt force trauma. That's it. There's no magic beans to my process. But most people seem to think that I have the capacity to raise money or sell things. And I guess that's true. If you look at what I've been able to accomplish, every customer or client that I work with is individualized. Some people come to me because they want to raise money. Some people come to me because they want to sell. Some people come to me because they think they're going to raise money in the future and they don't know how to do it. Some people come to me because they know they want to sell in the future and they want to put in place safeguards and guardrails and processes in order to maximize the value. Some people just want to get fucking yelled at. Some people just want to talk to me about how do I negotiate with this person and what do I do. In cannabis, unfortunately for me, I put myself in a position where the nexus of information that flows across this desk right here is as good as anyone's on the planet. I mean, anybody's. So some people just want information. So it just kind of depends. At this point, I'm pretty selective about who I work with and who I work for. If I look at situations where I have been successful, it's usually where I'm working directly for a CEO or a founder who's pretty much in control operationally and from a decision-making perspective of the company, and I have that person's mind share. Or, if I use kind of a home contracting type of analogy, I'm the tile guy. So you've hired me to tile the kitchen and tile the bathroom, and I'll do my job and I'll leave. So if you want me to go raise debt capital for you or raise equity capital for you or do something, you're specifically hiring me to do a job, and there's parameters around that job, and once I'm done with the job, I'm gone. So it just depends. It's all differential. A lot of it, honestly, man, at this point is just understanding human nature. I think I did the LinkedIn is very therapeutic for me because it allows me to express a lot of thought that I have in my head. But, I think I did a post where, I get on average about 600 inbounds a year. Okay. So
that's pretty good.
If it is, and I just want to do the math. So if it took me just a second, 40 times 4 equals, okay. So yeah, so if I take an hour to review every one of those deals, okay, that's 5 months of my time.
Uh-huh.
So just think about that. And if I've been doing what I've been doing for, let's call it 25 years, I've looked at least 15,000 transactions, minimally. And you need to be 10,000 to be an expert. So I'm a half log greater than an expert, right? Part of the reason that people want to work with me, I think, or part of the value that I add in an engagement is that I can pretty much tell what's going to happen. So if you're dealing with an investor or you have a term sheet from someone or you're trying to sell the company, I've experienced that game theory scenario 40 times. It's very rare where something happens where I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never experienced this before. Or, oh my gosh, I have a weird feeling that this guy is going to do this. Well, okay, he does. So I think a lot of when you talk about, what do I do? A lot of people just kind of want, that coach that's been there, that's won 4 or 5 championships to be like, okay, we got 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter and we're playing Jordan and we have a 10-point lead. How do we win?
Yeah, 100%.
Kind of a thing. So a lot of it's just that,
No, 100%. I think you're undermining yourself too, because it's not easy to sell 22 different companies and raise over $1 billion. And so, yeah, there's maybe no secret sauce or whatever, you just did it or whatever. But kudos to you for doing that, because it's a life experience that a lot of people don't really have. And I think that's why a lot of people come to you and ask for your opinion, because as you're saying, it's 4 minutes left in the quarter, fourth, and you're playing Jordan. And so talking about that, imagine like, a lot of people can't afford to work with you, and your time's really valuable, and I understand that. So imagine a mom and pop that's listening to this right now and say, well, I've been following this guy on LinkedIn. I'd really love to pick his brain. What would be the top piece of advice that you would give them? For example, I have a client right now. They just recently 2x, 3x their sales. Awesome. What should they be doing to allocate their money? 30% marketing, 30%. What's your typical formula? What would you say? Top piece of advice.
It all depends. It all depends. I think the question that I would ask, Sam, is not how do you allocate your capital? What's your goal? We've been conditioned as a species in the last, 100 years of capitalism for constant growth and exit. So the first question I usually ask somebody if I'm going to work with them is, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to do? What does Sam want to do? Do you want to sell? Did you create this to help people?
100%.
Did you help? Did you do this? Did you create this to build a global company? Did you create this to flip it? Like, don't answer me now, but go do your moccasin walk, I call it. Go walk around in your shoes for a week and come back to me and tell me why you did this. Right? Some people will answer right away. So as opposed to how do you allocate capital, the first question that I want to know is, what's the objective? Right? Because what I say to people is that if you have a company and your horizon objective is like this, and I don't agree with the objective, it doesn't matter what I'm going to tell you, because one, you're not going to listen to me, and two, you're not going to be successful with me. So, the first question is, where do you want to go? And if I understand where you want to go and I agree with it, then it's, what do we do to get there, and how do you allocate capital? And based upon where you want to go, the questions to the answers of capital allocation might be different. To your point, yeah, I'm really fucking expensive, So one of the things that I'm trying to do on LinkedIn, hopefully this year, is to create some products that are more affordable and more reasonable for people that come to me. One thing that's very difficult for people to accept, Sam, is that their child is ugly or is not gifted. And most people, when they come up with an idea to start a company or have an idea to make money, it's very hard for them to hear that this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
When I've been divorced once, and I've learned more in that process than anything. And I just married a wonderful person, but just the wrong person. And as I was getting married, a very dear friend of mine came to me and said, "Bud, this is a bad idea. Don't do this." And I was like, I couldn't hear it. 30 years later, I'm like, you were right. And that's how I feel about some people in some of these companies that they start and some of the businesses that I see. At this point, given the amount of reps that I've gotten, it's very easy for me, within a very cursory evaluation of an opportunity or interacting with someone, for me to come to a conclusion of, does this have any chance of being successful? So that's pretty easy.
Yeah, I love it. Let's see if we can dive a little bit deeper. I'll use me as an example. I'm not the one who's important here. I'm trying to reach, dispensary owners or people in my audience. But myself personally, I want to make a few million, and I want to open up a cat refuge. And so I would imagine this is a pretty similar dream. Somebody wants to make a few million, and they want to go in a retirement home at in Hawaii or whatever, and just live off the rest of their days. What is the best path for doing so?
Well, if I knew the answer to that question, we wouldn't be on the phone. I'd be sitting in my cat refuge on the North Shore of Oahu, smoking catnip joints.
Love it.
It depends. It depends. I think for your audience, I believe a lot of people in the cannabis industry have been sold a dream that is not true. And that dream is that a dispensary is going to be a gold mine. For a single store operator in a lot of places in the country, it's a very difficult business proposition. The combination of, specifically in California, high initial rent, high levels of taxation and unconstrained competition creates an economic or capitalistic environment that does not favor the smaller operator. And I think you're seeing that manifest in store closures in California. So I think if you are a store, if you are a single store, smaller operator, one of my fundamental, tenets is if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And, I have a lot of people who come to me and say, I want to, start a business in the cannabis industry. And I really lovingly tell them that's a bad idea. So I think it just depends on the situation. But I think for the people in your audience, you really have to assess what you're doing and why you're doing it and what the end game is. And the factual reality of the end game may not be consistent with the reason that you started the business and what the end game might be. And that's a very difficult realization for a lot of people. And it's not fun to deliver that news.
Yeah, but it's real and it's honest, and that's what people are looking for when they're coming to you.
Well, how about this? If you're running a store and you're behind on your taxes and you're not making money, that situation ain't improving. It's like your drug addict cousin telling you that he's never going to steal money from your dresser again because he fucking found Jesus.
100%.
So,
well, let's move forward a little bit. This has been really informative, and so we presented ourselves to each other, shall we say, through kind of a little bit of a drama, shall we say. And so we were talking about MedMen. And Adam Bierman specifically, is somebody I had at my show, and he shared a lot with me about why he think MedMen failed. And it's a reason that he published his book, which actually publishes today as we're recording this, April 22nd. And so I'm kind of curious to kind of dive in a little bit more on your thoughts of MedMen, Adam Bierman specifically, from the perspective of somebody who's working for publicly traded companies as MedMen was. And I'll let you have the floor.
We can talk about the problems that are inherent in many emerging growth industries and early stage companies when a new idea appears and a bolus of capital shows up. And usually that invokes the upregulation of two things: way too much capital and not enough adult supervision. So my best corollary for that is a small company called Theranos that you might have heard of.
No.
Where a woman. Okay, well, look it up. It's aside from Enron, it's maybe one of the greatest corporate frauds that has ever been perpetrated by a female founder named Elizabeth Holmes, who I think went to jail for defrauding investors, raising several $1 billion for a technology which never worked. Okay.
Wow.
So the thesis of way too much capital and not enough adult supervision is something that across biotech and tech and, consumer products and wellness and sports nutro and cannabis and SaaS and a couple of these DTC marketing companies and a lot of these verticals that I've seen exists. And you could talk about case studies in all of those areas where something got hot and somebody raised a lot of money early and it blew up. Because cannabis was predicated, the fundamental investment thesis in cannabis from 2014 to about 2018 was that federal reform was coming and a giant number of exits were going to happen. And to his credit, and I will say it, Adam Bierman was one of the very first people to capitalize on that wave and raise a bolus of capital and create what I still think is one of the most enduring brands in cannabis. So for that, I will give Adam Bierman tip of the cap. However,
let's hear it.
I try to stay humble in what I do. I try to be gracious for every opportunity that I'm given, and I try to. In the deal business, you say you're only as good as your last deal, and I try to be forthright in the way that I approach things. Many people who do what I do don't want to share the knowledge, are arrogant, are people that you don't want to have dinner with, are jerks. pretend that they did everything. I try to take credit for as little as possible, right? When I encounter someone like Adam Bierman, who effectively professes that he invented oxygen and perpetrated what I believe is a very decent case of corporate malfeasance, and was excommunicated from the industry and blew $400 million, to then come back and publish a book and say that I created the industry and the mistakes that were inherent in the company were because they stole the company from me. He just needs to shut the fuck up and stay in Costa Rica. Something else that I will tell you, Sam, and I'm not indicting anyone, in my vast experience, when people make a lot of money and they go to another country around a cloud of suspicion, usually not a good sign. Usually a sign that they're leaving the country for something other than peace of mind. So, when I add all that together, my vitriol, my venom, which has been spewed at Mr. Bierman in the last couple of weeks, has nothing to do with the fact that, Adam didn't accomplish a lot of things. It just has to do with the fact that when you soar to that height and you fall precipitously, and you don't humbly say, I messed up and I want an apology, but you come back and you say, this was stolen from me and I created everything and everyone who's in cannabis is lucky because I was the vanguard, you just need to shut the fuck up. So my anger at you was not about the fact that I don't, think Adam is intelligent or I dislike Adam. It's that cannabis is so fucking hard, bro. And we're all in this together. And the fact that Adam Bierman has a platform to be able to even have a voice to talk about cannabis is something that everybody in this industry should stop. Because what he's doing is he's making us all look even stupider than he looked. And that's what I'm upset about. So, I'll leave it there.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And just, we were talking privately. The reason I connected with him and treated him well is just because he treated me personally with respect. And it's a lot of, you're doing the same thing. You're on this show, you're treating me with respect. You're not cussing me out. You're not saying I'm an asshole, shithead, stupid, or anything like that. So to give you the same sort of approach and the same sort of energy back to you. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that opinion. And it's definitely very viable and it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, no, 100%. I try to be humble too. I don't try to flex on what I'm doing on LinkedIn or whatever. And
it just drives me nuts that, and it's not just you, but people who I respect, like Javi Hess, who gets a lot of Benzinga and gets picked up in Forbes, and the guys at Cultivated Media, who I think are really, really smart, do a great job. The fact that this guy's getting a second chance to have a platform is what annoys me. And he fucking annoys me because he's a douche, So, you didn't. No one invented the cannabis industry, and continue to take credit for the biggest corporate failure with no self-awareness of the fact that it was the biggest corporate failure, and it makes us all look bad, is what I'm upset about. So,
no, 100%. Shout out Javier Haas, great guy. Met him here in Peru recently. Really great guy. Be nice to connect with him. Have him on the podcast as well. But let's
great guy.
Let's start to wrap things up here. And so just some more fun questions to kind of wrap this up. And so first of all, what's with all the bracelets and the jewelry? What's the deal? Is there a story behind that?
The story behind it is that in 2014, I lost my dad, who was my business partner.
Rest in peace.
Thank you. And in 2016, I lost my mom. And
rest in peace.
Between 2014 and 2016, I was involved in creating this therapeutic drug development company in cannabis, and I raised a lot of money. And I used to wear the beads kind of privately, just when I would go out. It was just one bead. And long story short, one day I got off a red eye. I got into New York City. I went I took a shower at the airport, changed into a three-piece suit, and I left the beads on. Kind of didn't really think about it. And I walked into a meeting and this guy was like, "You're wearing beads?" And I was like, "Yeah, I am." And once I wore the beads and like no one kind of said anything, I was like, "Ah, well, okay." When I started into cannabis, I had a guy who taught me very early on in the investment industry, if you show up somewhere, give someone something with no expectation of return. Give them a gift, give them a book, give them something. And I started making bracelets, and I would show up at meetings with mason jars full of bracelets, and I would give them to people. And so it was before LinkedIn, making bracelets was my creative outlet. And so it's just those two things have kind of stuck.
No, love it, love it. Switch gears a little bit. I'm curious to hear about your first time trying cannabis. What was that like? How old were you? Where?
It was good. I went to college at the University of Denver. They're not going to like it when I say that you can't spell drugs without the U. But I grew up in the household of a guy who grew up in an orphanage, and I was scared of my dad. So I really didn't smoke weed or even drink beer until I didn't drink beer until like the summer of my senior year of college. High school. Drugs were rampant when I went to college. I mean, everywhere. Like, I'd never seen anything like it before. And beginning of my sophomore year was the first time I smoked weed, and it was great. And I think I smoked weed almost every day from the time I was 18 years old to the time I was 29. So I just enjoyed the plant a lot.
Can relate to that. These days, I'm assuming you're not an everyday smoker anymore. You can kind of tell by how you talk and whatever. But when you do partake, what is your favorite product these days?
I hardly consume anymore, Sam. When I was at ease, I started smoking again, and one day will be probably a scene in a movie story where we bought a lot of weed from somebody. And long story short, when I smoke a joint now, I faint. I have some low blood pressure thing. So normally it's going to be a gummy. It's going to be a low dose beverage or a low dose gummy, or a high CBD, low THC product is normally what I'll take more often than not. But as a consumer, I'm done.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I love the CBD though. That's another great way to consume without getting really high.
There's a lot, there's a lot of 20-to-1 like a 20-to-1 gummy product. I'll take two of those. I also, I do like Can is a company that my former partner runs and has been very successful in the beverage space, and that 4 THC, 2 CBD product set works. Half of a 5 milligram can will put me in a good place. So might microdose a psychedelic every once in a while too. But that's kind of the space that I'm in now.
I love it. Well, that's another rabbit hole we could go into on another day. We're up and up here. But one more question for you, Seth. Looking forward the next 4 or 5 years, knowing what you know, seeing what you see over at Yakatan Associates, what do you expect for the next 4 or 5 years of the cannabis industry?
I expect the balance of this year to be difficult. The lack of capital, the lack of profitability, the slowing of the logarithmic growth that you've seen, I think is going to make it more difficult to operate. If you get federal reform, and I don't seem to be able to understand when, if, or how that will ever happen, but if you get federal reform, I believe that cannabis will be the hottest industry for M&A activity of any industry that we have. So, to be honest with you, Sam, that's what I'm playing for. I've got 100 companies that I talk to regularly, and I have 25 to 30 CEOs that are not my customers and are my friends and who call me for advice and know that at one moment, if M&M Mars calls on the company, that there's probably 3 people on the planet that they want to figure out how to help them do that deal for them, and I'm one of them. So I'm just waiting kind of for the call. If that doesn't happen, and you don't get some clarity at the federal level on what the government is going to do around cannabis, I think it's going to be hard sledding. I think you're going to continue to see hemp encroach. I think if you get Farm Bill understanding, you probably see a couple beverage deals happen, and it's probably business as usual. The States Act was recently reintroduced. Boy, if that passed, it would be a home run. It would be an absolute home run for me. And, I've kind of, I think, put myself to be in a position, if inflection happens, to be a very important person and a high-value utility person. And I'm waiting for my moment. I don't, you don't know me very well. I don't think I've done anything yet, honestly. Like, I don't even think I've accomplished almost anything. So
it's the mind of an entrepreneur. You always go and leveling up, and then you just never know where to stop, no?
It's not just that, man. Just like the view of what I need to feel like I've actually done something, I guess, is given the things that I have done, is just logarithmically higher. I know what it is, and I'm working for it. And if I achieve it, it'll be great. And if I don't, it'll be great. So, one thing that I've definitely learned is, as I've got older, I've gotten wiser, and I've disassociated myself from outcomes. And the further I disassociate myself from outcomes, the more outcomes I end up getting. It's kind of interesting.
No, that's an interesting point. That's something I could take home personally. But thanks again, Seth.
Well,
go ahead.
If you want to stay there for 1 minute.
Yeah, of course.
It's the whole entrepreneurial psychology, right? I'm going to hustle as hard as I possibly can. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to make 600 phone calls. I'm going to force this to occur because of my will. That was me for years. I'm going to make this happen.
I didn't come here to be attacked. What is this?
No, right? When I kind of let that go, and I was like, I'm just going to put the pieces on the board and make a couple phone calls and kind of, put the kindergartners in the room and see if they get along. And if it happens, great. But I'm not going to tie my self-worth and my validation to the thing occurring. Here's what I think is going to happen, and here's how I can help you. And if you want to listen to me, great. And if you don't want to listen to me, I'm probably going to be right. Once I started allowing an entire universe of possibility expanded and opened up for me. And for me, in the last 35 years, that's literally, I think, been the most critical lesson. Allowing, not forcing.
Love it, Seth. There's actually words of wisdom in there. And thank you again for coming on, just sharing a little bit of your knowledge. It was really great to meet you. Definitely wish you all the best, and not just you, your sister, and your family, and Yakatan Associates. And we'll be in touch. I'm looking forward to watching you grow. Looking forward to continuing to see your hot takes and industry advice and all that. And wish you all the best.
I appreciate it, sir. We will talk soon.
Sounds great. Hey, Sam here. Thanks again for listening to the GDM Podcast. So we do websites and SEO for cannabis brands and operators, and we do things a little bit differently here at GDM, where we can promise results within weeks rather than months. And so if you're looking to sell more ounces, bongs, other premium products, start selling some more weed, get in touch with us at Green Dispensary Marketing to learn more. Thanks again for listening, and hope you have a great day.